All right, Eric, do you have a Star Trek trivia question for us?
I do.
Really?
I do have one for you. Oh, but I screwed it up. 1 second. Now I've done it. I wanted a specific one and I screwed it up. Oh, well, we're stuck with this one. Wait a minute, are we? Yes, we are. Okay. I wanted to do 216. I did 219. It's my sixes and my nines.
Uh-huh.
Here we go. Which famous 1960s author? This is so easy. No, it's not. Wait, is it?
Arthur
Which
C.
famous
Clarke?
I don't know. I can't answer that.
Well, no, the first one that came to mind. Okay, well, that gives it away. Which famous 1960s author wrote the episode Shore Leave, in which the Enterprise crew encounters a planet where every thought can come true? A. Theodore Sturgeon. B. Isaac Asimov. C. Harlan Ellison. Or D. Robert Bloch.
If I can only break one leg, I'm out.
I'm not a plebe!
It's just I'm a soulless Euro game lover. And not to criticize Richard Garfield's design decisions, but...
Welcome to A Piece of the Action. I'm Micah.
I'm Eric.
And I'm Greg.
And before we get started here, just a quick note at the top. If you enjoy listening to long-form discussions about board games like these, please consider supporting us by subscribing or giving a like to our video. Also, feel free to tell us what you liked and what you thought about the board game we're going to be discussing today by leaving us a comment below. Today, we are going to be talking about the game King of Tokyo. This is by a pretty obscure board game designer by the name of Richard Garfield, right?
Yeah, I think you got his name right.
Yeah.
It's hard to pronounce.
Yeah. So he invented something called Magic the Gathering, I think. So anyway, I'm not familiar with it really, but
and a dinky little follow-up called Android Netrunner. But,
yeah, yeah. So it's good to see him getting a break with a game like King of Tokyo. So as usual, Greg and Eric, you guys sat down and you played this for us. And so let's go ahead and we'll start with Eric. I'm kind of interested here because I have absolutely no idea what this game is. So, Eric, what is the premise of King of Tokyo?
Well, we were in the same boat, Micah, because I hadn't played this before. Before reviewing for this, I'd heard of it and I knew what it was about, but I had never played it. But King of Tokyo is take Yahtzee, add monsters, and make it King of the Hill, and that's what King of Tokyo is. Players take turns. They roll dice like Yahtzee style several times, and there's 4 things they can generate with their dice. They can generate VP. I don't know what they're called. They can generate attack points. What's that called, Greg?
I don't know. Claws? I don't know.
Well, no. It's called slams or whams or something like that.
I have no idea.
Okay. Well, there's a term.
You're the theme guy. You're supposed to remember this.
So it generates VP, attack points, recovery points, which basically just give you your hit points back.
Hearts.
Or energy. Yeah, hearts. Or energy. And energy is just a currency that you can use to buy stuff with.
In Greg's mind, everything is just labeled like, cubes of type A, cubes of type B.
One subtracts points from one of your tracks, and one adds points to one of them.
You see everything on a sine wave. It's like,
yeah.
So you keep.
Are they energy cubes? I thought they were like energon cubes or something.
Energon cubes. That's Transformers.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, so what you do? Everybody's played Yahtzee, so you play. It's the turn is like Yahtzee. When it's your turn, you roll a bunch of dice. You keep what you want, and you re-roll what you don't. You do that a couple of times, and that's your primary decision space on your turn, where what you keep, what you don't. If you end your turn with any attack points or claws, then you have to attack the player who is in Tokyo. And if nobody's in Tokyo, then you have to enter Tokyo. And that's the equivalent of being on top of the hill in the schoolyard King of the Hill game. So when you're in Tokyo, everyone else's attacks hit you, and your attacks hit everyone else. And you get a little bit of extra VP bonus if you can stay in Tokyo for an entire round. And then when it's not your turn, so that's if you roll a bunch of attacks on your turn, you can enter Tokyo. If it's not your turn and you're damaged, then you can choose to leave Tokyo. And if you do, then the person who damaged you has to enter. And then other than that, there's some special powers you can buy with the energy that you roll. That's the game.
Is this like you're playing like your Godzilla and Mothra? Is that why this is
Kaiju.
Tokyo?
It's Kaiju. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
All right. Okay. And how many? It sounds like how many people does this play?
So the box says 2 to 6. 2 players nonsensical on that. I cannot imagine playing this at 2-player.
Why is that?
King of the Hill with 2 people.
King of the Hill with 2 people. That just.
Oh yeah.
It just makes no sense. Even 3, I feel, is pushing it, but I think it works at 3. So for me, it's a 3 to 6 player game, with the edge cases being the least.
Oh really? You don't think 6 is a good?
6 is good. I like 6, but it does go a bit longer before it gets back to your turn. To me, it's still fine. I would play this at 6, but 4 and 5 to me is that sweet spot.
And there is an accommodation for higher player counts that there's Tokyo, and then there's the Bay of Tokyo or something
Tokyo
like that.
Bay or something, yeah.
Tokyo Bay. So if you get a higher player count, then another location opens up that you can enter.
It is, but you still have to wait for all those players to take their turn. With 6 is fine. I'm not saying it's bad at 6, but for me, my mind, this is a 3 to 6 player game, despite what the box says.
Is that in the base game that you get the second location, or is that?
Nope. Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Yes, base game.
That's the base game. Okay. Yeah, we didn't play any expansions.
Okay. Okay. And so, and how long does it take to go through a game?
I'd say about 30 minutes. And I don't know about you, Greg. I felt like the game would only increase a little bit with higher player counts. The game moves pretty fast.
Yeah,
like even with 6 players, I think you could get through it in 45 minutes.
Yeah, I think 45 is the upper limit on this because, we'll get into this later. There is player elimination, so people do get kicked out eventually. So, the count gets smaller. So even if you start with 6 players, eventually you'll probably be playing a 3-player game anyways. So, yeah.
All right. Okay, so let's talk about the anything else you guys want to say about as far as the theme of the game goes, how it was implemented, how it,
I have something to say.
Yeah.
About theme.
Go ahead.
Well, I wasn't blown away. I say the deal is that the theme comes almost exclusively from the art and the components, in my opinion. So it's a fighting theme, and that could be tacked on to anything. So, and there's been other games that have done like fighting card games, kind of a thing. This is a fighting dice game, and there's been tons of those. So it could be anything. What I actually missed about the theme, and I think that they, I don't know, I think it would be a different game if it did this. But one thing that I wish the game did, because of what it says it says it's a kaiju game, but it didn't give me the feeling of destruction that I want out of a kaiju game. So like, there's nothing to destroy. Tokyo itself plays no role in King of Tokyo. It's just it's just a location.
It's just a hill.
It's just a hill. That's it. So all it is a fighting game, and but I would have liked. I think it was a missed opportunity to have a little bit of Tokyo destruction happen there. Special powers help a little bit, but honestly, the powers they could fit into any other over-the-top fighting game or like a superheroes game, something like that.
It seems like anything that has conflict could be mapped onto ostensibly some sort of a fight theme, but I think they could have done more in terms of like rampaging through a city type of a feel or something like that.
I would have liked that, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Different game, though. It would have been a different game. And I know there's games there was a miniatures game where you could...
You're probably thinking of Terror in Meeple City. That's not a miniatures game. That's a dexterity game.
No. There was a miniatures game. You could buy like the kaijus on the buildings and stuff, and it was a full-on miniatures game that they came out with probably about 5 years ago. but I don't remember what it was. You could buy like Mothra and all these guys with stats.
Well, if you're looking for a kaiju game, I think Terror in Meeple City. It used to be called Rampage, I think. They had to change the name because of copyright issue, but it's basically a dexterity game where you build buildings with meeples in them as the walls, and you literally like flick things off the top of the monsters' heads, and like you destroy, and the meeples that fall within the vicinity of you eat, and those are your points.
That's fantastic.
It's probably the most kaiju-ish game I've ever seen. King of Tokyo is not that. I agree.
No, it's not.
I think the closest King of Tokyo gets to actually implementing a theme is the power cards. There's some there, but for the most part, I agree. It's just a King of the Hill game. There's no destruction. They try to add some in King of New York. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's not. It's just a fighting game. I agree.
All right. Okay. Well, then, apart from that theme, how did it feel to actually play the game? What did you guys think as you were playing it? Was it tense? Did you feel like you were racing, or what's sort of the dynamic that you're engaging with when you play? Maybe Greg?
Yeah, it's just this qualifies for what you often hear called a beer and pretzels game, which I think is a good description of it. It's pretty random. It's a dice chucker. It's not the kind of game you're going to sit down and just be all brain-burning thinking through strategies. It's meant to be light fun, and I think it accomplishes that. Eric alluded to the whole staying in Tokyo the entire time, so that gives like a push your luck feel to it. Like, how far do I want to push this without getting killed? Because you can die and be eliminated from the game. So that's a big part of the feel to me, is rolling the dice, randomly seeing what you get, getting some cool power-ups once in a while, and then pushing your luck once in a while. To me, that's the general feeling, the vibes I get from the game.
Okay. Seems pretty, the way you're talking about it makes it sound, I mean, beer and pretzel game makes it sound pretty light and casual.
Yeah,
it is.
Absolutely.
Let's go on then to priorities and strategies for King of Tokyo. Are there any priorities or strategies to a dice chucky type game like that? Greg?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got two main paths to victory. You can just roll dice trying to collect those points. You can get 1, 2, or 3, or more points actually from the dice that you roll. Or you can just try to bash people and get them to 0 life, because you can either win by being the last monster standing, or get the 20 points, victory points. Those are your two ways to win. There's not a ton of strategy. It's definitely a tactical game for sure. I don't think you can go in and say, this is the way I'm going to win. I think the main thing is to just go with what the dice give you. You know, I mean, if you may say, hey, I want to go into Tokyo and get points that way, but if you just roll a bunch of 3s on your first roll, well, the dice have spoken. Go with what they say. So I think if you get locked into a single strategy, that could hurt you. I think you just go with what the dice give you. I guess if there was like an optimal strategy that I haven't played this enough to say, but it feels to me like you kind of want to stay out of Tokyo and just collect points for a while, collect some power-ups, and when everyone's weakest, jump in and try to bash everyone to death. That's kind of how I think it would work. But yeah, it's not a strategic game by a long shot. Those are just some very initial impressions I have on it.
All right. Eric?
Yep. This is the way you listen up, folks. Here's how you win King of Tokyo. There's a single strategy to win King of. Actually, no, I'm joking. Greg is right, but there's two main decisions that you need to make through the course of the game. There's only two places that make any difference. One is what you keep in your dice roll, and the other is when you leave Tokyo, not when you enter Tokyo, because you have less agency when it comes to when you enter Tokyo than when you leave Tokyo. So those two things, what are you keeping? What's important on your turn? What are you trying to, because there's 4 things you can try to keep in your dice roll. And then when do you leave Tokyo? And I agree with what Greg said. I believe that a good strategy for this game is to focus the early part of the game on getting a few extra victory points so you don't get left behind, but primarily getting energy to buy cool powers. You got to get some cool powers. And then the second half of the game, what you do is, after you've bought some powers, focus on occupying Tokyo and keeping your health up. So
Yeah.
that's what I would suggest. And because I don't really think, also you do need to pay attention to what other players have, because some of those powers, the special powers, are pretty swingy. And so you need to pay attention. If you're in Tokyo and you're going to be taking all the hits, you need to make sure how many turns you can make it, because some people's powers can really lay into you.
Let me.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I had something else to say. I forgot what it was.
Let me know if this steps on what we're going to get into in the pros and cons. But for those powers, are there any powers that are a little too swingy, a little too OP, or they feel?
Greg would probably know better than me.
This will probably come up a little bit in the pros and cons. A little bit.
Okay.
But I do, to add to what Eric is saying, I do think the power cards can also inform what you do with your strategy, because there's only 3 out at a time. So depending on what's out, there's some cards that are just like help you in healing up, and that might make you want to go with more of a defensive strategy. Or there's cards that just give you straight victory points. But then there's other cards that are more aggressive. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. What cards are out? Which ones will work towards my strategy the best? But yeah.
Right. Okay. All right. Well, let's go ahead then and get into the pros and cons. What does King of Tokyo do well? What does it not do well? So let's start out, as we typically do, with what does King of Tokyo do well? Eric.
So King of Tokyo is a really good filler. It's a fast, silly game, and I think the whole family can enjoy it. But I wanted to talk a little bit about what we've mentioned a couple times already, which is the player elimination aspect of the game. I think it's the first game that we've reviewed that has really direct player elimination, and I think this is a calculated, intentional move on the part of Richard Garfield, because player elimination is always a really controversial element in games, because in my opinion, I think player elimination contains an inherent contradiction. That being that in games, in competitive games, it's all about beating other players. So given that, there is no purer form of success then if you force your opponents to stop playing the game. So in that sense, player elimination is the most honest form of competition. And this isn't really a problem in 2-player games, but that model gets a little tricky when you have more than 2 players, because on the other side of the equation is the fact that games are usually expected to be fun for everyone who's playing them, and most people would agree that being eliminated from a game is not super fun. So in that sense, in kind of a John Stuart Mill sense, player elimination reduces the overall utility of the game because it has the potential to make the game not very fun for a certain number of players. So that's the dilemma. And I think that pretty much every game designer has to grapple with how they're going to square that circle. And for the most part, modern games have decided to hamstring player elimination by either basically throwing it out, or making it temporary, or creating catch-up mechanisms for players who are in danger of being eliminated. But King of Tokyo, on the other hand, keeps it in, but it balances it with a very short playtime. And so what ends up happening is you get this super silly random game that just rips your throat out if you make bad decisions. Or sometimes just because the dice feel like ripping your throat out. And I think that juxtaposition is humorous, and I think it works.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be more forgivable if the game's only going to last, if you've been invited over to someone's house, the whole group is playing, and you're kicked out 18 minutes into a 30-minute game, right? You only need to sit around for a little while before you get to jump back in or something, that's better than...
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really want to make a blanket statement about how I feel about player elimination in general because I think it's a really hard topic to be dogmatic about. I'm not inherently opposed to it because all games, like I said, all games have some form of player elimination. Even like in a way, in a sense, even co-op games, when the game ends, all the players are
Right.
eliminated.
Well, I mean, winning is a binary state, right? So
Yeah.
you're eliminated. Either everyone who loses is eliminated at the same time, or they're eliminated at different times, but
Right.
elimination
Yeah.
happens,
So
right?
I think it's all about how to mitigate the harshness of player elimination. And some games are just so fun. You don't care. You want to play them even though they're harsh. Some games have like in my opinion, some games have a bit of a nostalgia tied up with their player elimination, like Diplomacy. Diplomacy is a 10 on my BGG. It's one of my favorite games of all time. Also, one of the harshest games of all time. It's incredibly brutal, but that's part of the draw for it.
Yeah.
And then another thing to remember is that player elimination can be great for the players who aren't getting eliminated. So in that sense, I guess there's a balance of fun if you want to look at it that way.
Maybe the utility balances out.
There you go.
It's a neutral.
And then other games, they're just so well designed that the end game just kind of arrives organically without much risk of an early shutout from one player. So it's all just a style thing. It's a style of the game design, but it's also style of preference, player preference. So if you're only comfortable with like light co-ops, then this isn't going to work for you. But I think the beauty of King of Tokyo is that it wears its player elimination proudly, and so everyone can either cry about it or gloat about it for 10 minutes until the next game starts.
Okay, so yeah, because we're talking about pros. So you're saying player elimination, the way it's handled here is a pro.
I like it.
Okay, I'd just like to point out the irony because when it comes to the world of RPGs, you're definitely in favor of player elimination.
That's
100%.
Right. Yes.
We call him King
See that through to the
TPK.
end.
Yeah, King TPK. Okay, Greg, what about you? What do you feel like King of Tokyo did well?
Oh, just to first talk about player elimination, since Eric just went over that. I agree. I think there's a lot of games out there that have effective player elimination, even if they don't really kick you out of the game. And the only way not to have that is to create catch-up mechanisms, which I don't like. So I'm not anti-player elimination. And I think in King of Tokyo it works. One, because it's a short game, but two, it does create that tension that's necessary for that King of the Hill element to work. Like it makes it really risky to stay in Tokyo because the penalty is getting kicked out of the game completely. So I guess the pros for King of Tokyo to me are, it is a very lightweight game. It's easy to teach. I like that atmosphere it brings. That push your luck aspect, I think, is particularly ingenious. So just to clarify what it does, the idea that when you go into Tokyo, the only way you get 1 point from going in for one, but then the only way to get 2 points is if you stay in long enough that on your next turn, you get 2 points at the beginning. So that really emphasizes the push your luck mechanism, because how many hits are you willing to take? If you're one turn away from getting that 2 points, do you risk it? The beautiful thing about that, though, is you can only leave Tokyo if you get hit, which I think is great. So if I'm going to stay, I have to take at least one more hit before I bounce back out, most likely more. Another beautiful thing about that mechanism is the reward is great. Yeah, it's 2 points. That's not amazing. But I think the best reward for staying in Tokyo is if you do get back to your turn, all of your claws smack everybody on the board at once. And that's just an amazing feeling if you can pull that off. And then the other aspect of that whole push your luck mechanism, that King of the Hill mechanism, is you can't heal while you're in Tokyo. So that, again, just kind of enhances the risk of staying in there. So all that rolled together just creates a very fun, tense, who knows how it's going to turn out, staying in Tokyo a bit. And it creates a lot of like hilarious moments. What I do also like is if you knock someone out of Tokyo, they decide to leave because you hit them, you must go in. So sometimes you get these moments where a person doesn't want to go in Tokyo. They have like 1 health left, and they roll the dice the 3rd time. Like, please don't roll a claw. Please don't roll a claw, because then the person that's in Tokyo, of course, leaves, lets that person in, and then they're going to die. Anyways, all that together just creates a lot of fun, I think. I do like the power-ups in this game because they quickly differentiate the players. I have powers that you don't have, and that just makes your monster unique. And finally, I don't talk a lot about components or theme or art. I don't notice art, but I do like components that have good tactile qualities. So I have to give props to the dice in this game because they're big, chunky, heavy dice, and they're fun to roll. And I love that tactile feel of those dice.
You're going to be playing Godzilla.
Yeah, except for the really, really early 1st edition ones, which are like I think they're screen printed, or they're like they're just painted on, so those numbers were off. But after the 1st edition, they started getting recessed numbers. But those dice are just great to roll. So I have to give props where props is due. So.
Okay, nice. You know, you Greg, you oftentimes mention that you like games that are harsh feeling. Does that player elimination aspect of King of Tokyo trigger that for you in that way, or is it a different thing for you?
It's different. I like games that allow you to be harsh because you have to outthink people. This game can be harsh mostly because the dice rolled poorly in your favor. So that's a different kind of harshness to me. If I get
harsh because life is harsh.
Yeah, exactly. It's not because you did something that outwitted me all the time. It's just because you rolled really well.
Okay, I kind of suspected that, but I thought I'd ask. All right, well let's go on then. If that covers it for you for the pros.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go on to the negatives of King of Tokyo. What could King of Tokyo have done better, Eric?
Well, I talked a lot about the good stuff, but ultimately, in my opinion, I'm not a huge fan of this game. I didn't really like it, and but I don't have a great deal to say as to why. It's very simple for me. It's just that it's too light to hold my attention for very long. But more than that, it makes me feel less like Godzilla and more like a Godzilla-shaped punching bag, which is not typically what I want when I'm playing a board game.
From your Godzilla games.
Yeah, I've got LARPs for that. So
right.
It's so it's just from a kaiju game, I don't feel very kaiju-y. So there's that, and it just doesn't fit the kind of game that I like. It's too much like other games like Yahtzee. So not really my wheelhouse.
Okay. All right. Greg?
Yeah, I mean, no surprise. At the end of the day, it's just too random for me. I mean, I get why people like this game, but it's not necessarily why I play games. It's just you don't. I mean, the dice can just roll completely out of your favor, and there's nothing you can do about it. But I think above that, there is one aspect of the game, and not to criticize Richard Garfield's design decisions, but there's an aspect of this that I kind of question. Because, okay, in my pros, I talked about, okay, the power cubes, where you can collect special powers, the claws, where you can hit people, the hearts that you recover from that. That's 3 faces of the dice. The other 3 faces of the dice is points, 1, 2, and 3. So it feels to me like it's going against the grain of what the game is trying to do. Like for me, that King of the Hill aspect is the fun part. Now you got these other 50% of the dice that are basically encouraging you to just sit back, turtle up, and collect points, which I feel goes against what the game is doing. And on top of it, 3 points. If I roll 3 threes, that's 3 points. And then every 3 I roll after that's an extra point. 3 points is a lot. If I go into Tokyo, that's a point. And if I'm able to stay the entire way back to my turn, it's another 2 points. So that's 3 points just for staying in Tokyo. I can get 3 points just by rolling 3 threes in the dice. And that's strictly better than if I just rolled 3 ones, which is only 1 point, right? So there's this whole aspect where there's a legit strategy in King of Tokyo where I could just sit back, never go into Tokyo, roll hearts when I need them because I got hit a couple times, and just collect points. And I just find that to go against what I'm looking in for the game. When I see this game, I'm thinking, oh, this is like friends. We're just going to be bashing each other in the face and doing stuff. But no, I could just sit here and just collect points by rolling sets of numbers, which is not an interesting strategy. It's not hard to do. I just find it kind of falls flat. And to go up to the power-ups aspect, there are some power-ups that are clearly better than others. I'm not against that for this type of game. It's fine. It's a chaotic game.
It's so random anyway.
Yeah, it's part of the fun, I think, is the chaos. But there's some power-ups I feel that are just annoying. Again, there's power-ups that just give you points. I just think that's boring. But there's also power-ups like where, for example, the game that we played this week, Jeremy had one that says if he dies, I can't remember the exact details, but if he dies,
he had a baby, or it was
he had a baby, so he loses
that's the
all
name
his
of the
victory
card.
points. He loses all his cards, and he just comes back at 20 life points. So if I just spent this
Extra
whole
life.
time, or 10 life points, if I spent all this time trying to kill him, and then he just regenerates like that, that just, I don't know, that to me seems annoying. But
Yeah, I hate it when bosses heal themselves.
Yeah, there's that. And then there's one other thing to note in the base game, anyways. So they have all these characters you can choose from. You got like a mechanical Godzilla, and like a King Kong creature, and like a giant squid or something that you can be. All these different kaiju, but they don't feel any different. They're just art. Now they change that eventually in the power-up expansion. That gives each character individual powers. But in the base game, go in knowing that the person you choose doesn't matter one bit. I should also mention with the points thing, in King of Tokyo, they actually changed those dice faces to be something different. And it involves, King of New York. It involves actually destroying buildings and things of that nature, military vehicles. And I will say, I played that. It does fix some of that, but then the game gets away from the simplicity that is King of Tokyo, and then it ends up feeling a little more complicated than I want out of a beer and pretzels game. So I don't know if there's a good fix for the points thing. Anyway, so there's my all in all. That's my negatives. I love half the game, but the other half seems to be going against that purpose. And at the end of the day, it's just too random for my taste.
Yeah, it feels like if you're going to have a game where you're playing monsters that are destroying a city, you're going to just have to live with it being light and chaotic, right? I mean, you don't want a super deep strategy game for something. I mean, it's like, it sounds like you can fault it for that, but it sort of seems like it is what it's advertised to be, right?
Yeah, I absolutely understand why people like this game. So I don't think it's a bad game at all. I think it hits the target audience it's shooting for. It's just I'm a soulless Euro game lover, so it's not for me. That's what it boils down to.
And that's ultimately what my opinion was too. It wasn't for me, but I do want to say something about the points thing that Greg mentioned. I think ultimately that Garfield put that in as a timer just to make sure that the game doesn't last very long, because so Munchkin has this problem where like you can play Munchkin for 3 hours and then just want to end yourself at the end because like it's just so like, can't we just be done with this? And so I think with I didn't see any ways to lose points really, except for maybe if you die and come back, like that one card that you mentioned. So I think it's just a timer to make sure that the game doesn't last forever. But ultimately, it feels to me like the game would usually end with player elimination and not through points, not through 20 points. But
sure, and I get there's probably a design reason for it. And like I said, there's not a good fix for it, but all I can say is that's how it felt at the end. So
like it was tacked on, like it's two different systems.
Yeah, it's not. It's just it. I wanted, you're going and thinking it's just going to be a game that's all about bashing, but then half of the dice rolls avail itself to a strategy that just involves doing nothing and having no interaction with the other players.
Yeah, I just don't think that's a really valid strategy. I don't think you can. Because I tried that, and you're going to lose. You're going to die if you just go for. I think you have to fight a bit. I think most of the games are going to end with one player being the final kaiju alive, and I think that the points are just there to make sure that battle doesn't last forever. I'm sure that there's plenty of games that have ended with 20 points, but I don't know. I appreciate the fact that he put that in there just because I don't want to play this game for 2 hours like I've played games of Munchkin.
No, I agree 100%. I mean, and that's the case. I'm just stating the feel of it. I'm not saying it's bad design per se. I'm just saying that if you're going into this thinking it's just going to be a all-out bloodbath, it doesn't necessarily have to be if everyone just rolls numbers all the time. If that's just the way your dice roll, you could just end up having a fairly non-interactive game.
Just feels weird that turtling is a valid strategy in a game.
Yeah, basically, that's what it is, and I do think it's a valid strategy. 3 points. I mean, and again, strategy in quotes here.
Right.
It depends on how the dice roll.
Like always, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because it just completely depends on how the dice roll. So if the dice never roll you numbers, then obviously you can't go with your strategy. But if you just happen to roll 3s, 2s, and 1s all the time, I say go for it. Or even power cubes where you can just collect the cards from the center that give you 50 points. There's power-ups that give you 50 points straight up. I think it's a way to win. I think you can totally win and never throw a punch. And that just seems wrong to me, I guess. At the end of the day.
Game about kaiju? Yeah.
Yeah, at the end of the day. And maybe I'm overstating this. I'm not saying it makes it a horrible game, but it felt at odds with, if I'm going to go in for a beer and pretzels game and just bash my friends in the head, I wanted to commit fully to that.
Right. Yeah, that's how you
are. You do like to commit to your friend bashing in the head. That's if there's one thing we know about you, Greg.
If I can only break one leg, I'm out.
Yeah.
You want to go all in.
All right. Okay, well, final thoughts. Is there anything you guys want to say? Would you recommend this game to anyone? What do you think of it? And anything you want to say about King of Tokyo you have not yet said, Eric?
I would recommend it, but I would recommend it for casual gamers who like silly kaiju movies and don't mind player elimination.
All right. Greg?
Yeah, I think for the right group, kind of Eric said, it's a good game. And I think I give it a 6, which is in that band that says that if I owned it, I could see pulling it out in certain circumstances if I happen to have the right group over. And maybe after that group had a beer or two. Mm-hmm. After a night of playing something else, I could see maybe wanting to pull this game out. And if everyone's in the right mood and everyone's getting into the theme and trash talking each other, I could see how it could be a fun game. So for that, I think it's good for that type of a scenario. But yeah, it's not for me. It's not a game that I would ever want to pull out, play with my gamer friends now. But yeah.
All right. Well, so if you haven't tried King of Tokyo, go buy some beer, buy some pretzels, get some friends together who are not too serious about it, and give it a try. That is going to fill up, complete our 10-game shelf. It's the last empty slot that we have on that shelf is going to go, for the time being, to Tokyo. Next week, we're going to begin the bloodbath of eliminating games from our shelf, or maybe not. Maybe the game we play next week will not be good enough and not make it on. We'll see. But I believe next week we're going to be considering code names. Is that correct? Or not code names?
No.
What am I saying?
We did that.
What is it?
Power Grid.
Power Grid. Yeah.
Slightly different games.
2 words. Yeah. Okay, so we'll be looking at Power Grid next time. And until then, just a reminder again, if you have not subscribed to us, please subscribe, like the video, and leave us a comment if you completely disagree with Greg and Eric and you think that King of Tokyo is a super strategic game that's extremely in-depth and analytical. Leave us a comment, let us know. Until then, this has been a piece of the action.
I know this one.
Do you? I don't.
I'm pretty sure it's Sturgeon.
Okay,
Ellison wrote Sitting Edge of Forever.
Mm-hmm.
Asimov
I think
never wrote a Star Trek episode, I don't think.
I don't think so. I think Robert Bloch
Um,
did one.
Robert Bloch would be my second guess, but for some
Asimov
reason,
is probably in there as the red herring then, as
Probably.
yeah.
right.
But this is the one with the Easter Bunny comes to life, right?
Yep.
Remember this episode?
Oh
Good
yeah.
work.
I'm gonna go with
And this is such a good episode too. This is the episode where they all have to like face their fears, kind of.
this
And
is
it's
the one with
where
Kirk's.
Kirk's
Yes.
like his older the guy who was above him in class, his
Yes, was
senior
like
classmate.
flattery,
Oh
something
man,
like that.
I still use this line, whereas he calls him a plebe over and over and over again, and Kirk's response is like, "I'm not a plebe," and I thought that was so hilarious. Yeah, that's the one.
Yes, I remember that episode. I'm gonna go with Sturgeon, but it could be Bloch now that we were talking about it.
I think I'm going to go with Sturgeon too. I'm not sure about Bloch. I believe more in Sturgeon. What do you say, Micah?
Well, I'll be contrary then, and I'll go with Bloch.
Go with Bloch. Okay, let's go with Sturgeon and see what happens. Choose the answer. It is Theodore Sturgeon.
Hey.
Wrote that episode of Shore Leave.
All right.
Cool.